It's going to get even harder for first home buyers to break into the market. But that shouldn't stop you. Today we explore what you can do to overcome 5 of the biggest challenges.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. And that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories and avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on.
We've got loads of free tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll get access to our free webinar, How to Buy Your First Home with the Right Amount of Debt. You'll also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to be educated home buyers. We have created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change rapidly. So always check with the relevant government authority or your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about overcoming the challenges of being a first home buyer in a rising market, and specifically 5 reasons you should not give up. But before we get into that, special house behind you this week, Meighan. It looks like a hopper in a mine, perhaps. Is that
again?
I've hoppers in mines.
Delving into the oh my god category of Airbnb. This is the funnel. Yes, it is in fact a funnel, Veronica. It's in Harlingen in the Netherlands. So this actually overlooks the water. It's a tidal area and apparently incredibly romantic. I don't see it myself.
No. So if anyone's watching the video, tune in. Let us know if you agree this does not look like a very
Not
romantic.
sure that's where I'd like a proposal or any such thing.
No,
Anyway,
it's just put
think
it
of
out
better
there.
places.
Put it out there right now. We don't want it. All right. According to the ANZ Corelogic Housing Affordability Report, sounds very officious, doesn't it? It's going to get even harder for first home buyers to break into the market.
Oh, seriously? Isn't it hard enough already?
I know. But you know what? It should not stop you. And we've got to remember our press loves scare tactics, loves negative headlines, and these reports sort of make things worse. So today we're going to explore what those challenges are and look at some tips on how to overcome them.
I love it. And here's our top 5, Veronica. And as you say, this is based on the ANZ Corelogic Housing Affordability Report. Now, this is a regularly produced report. Some things are going to be the same over and over and over again because the number one challenge, the first challenge, is the time that it takes to save a deposit. Now, the report says that property prices are expected to keep rising as interest rates stay on hold. They could increase faster once interest rates start to come down next year. Now, that makes sense because money becomes a little bit easier to come by. But what that means is first home buyers would need to save a bigger deposit, which could actually take longer.
Yeah. Now, it's like, I don't know, it already takes, say in Sydney, it's apparently like 12 years to save a deposit. I mean, I don't know, what's another 6 months when it takes you 12 years? I mean,
well, that's all right if the market's going backwards. But we're talking about the fact that this report is saying that, prices and you and I are starting to see prices are rising again. We're seeing 3 to 4% people paying above what we would assess as market value. And if you've done the free mini course, How to Price a Property, you know what market value is, market appraisal is, and how to determine it. So when, we're in September 2023 and prices again starting to go up. At a moderate pace.
So I guess what I make light of that to say what's the difference, what's another 6 months when it's already taking you 12 years, is the fact is that this is, yes, prices look like they're on the rise again. This is not a new situation. it's always been shit, you know? So this is just more shit, right?
It's just a different decade.
A different decade, a different serving of shit. So in terms of first home buyers, and what we're trying to say here is don't let this noise that that sort of thing creates turn you off your goal of buying a home. It's worthwhile persisting, right? And so I guess the big question, what can you do about this, is looking at how can you get in with a smaller deposit. So this is going to be a fact of the matter. And what we're always telling people to do is don't fight reality. You know, this is...
Do you remember we had a student, Veronica, and I know that I've talked about him a lot. We had a student who he was waging a one-man war against the property market. Every time we had a live Q&A with him, he would say, I just can't believe that you've got to pay that much to buy that property.
I refuse.
And remember we ended up saying, you know what? Suck it up. It just is what it is. You can't fight it. And it was almost like this switch went and he went, all right, well, I've just got to go with what it is and deal with it and work with it. And they bought.
They did.
Once he got over the fight.
Yeah, the sense of relief he had too. I think that was the most amazing thing. It's like, oh my God, I've let go. And now I'm going to go and buy my family a home, you know. And his wife, I think it saved his marriage too, just quietly. I think his wife was going a bit nuts.
She did lament it sometimes. So let's talk about what the options are here, because you know, there is a lot of chatter out there, and you might hear it in the noise that is around you when you're a first home buyer, where people say to you, you have to save 20% so that you avoid LMI. Now, Veronica and I are big believers that you explore all of your options. Don't just listen to what someone else says to you, because personally, I used LMI to get into my second property, not even my first property, my second property, because the market was moving so quickly. I couldn't outsave it. I couldn't save enough to keep up with how much prices were rising. So it was worth actually looking at. And it's something that you can explore as a way to get in with a lower deposit.
Now, we have done an episode on this recently, so look at the back, only probably the last couple of months. But the thing is, what is LMI? It's lender's mortgage insurance, and it's an added cost. And I think that's what freaks people out. It's like, God, isn't it hard enough? I mean, we have people who don't even want to pay $9.90 to do our course, even though we can actually save way more than $9.90 in negotiation just by knowing this stuff, right? But so I get it. We totally get that when you're saving your deposit, every cent just seems so precious and you don't want to part with it. But certainly if there is a case for getting into the market earlier and saving on rising prices, and the small price of that is paying lender's mortgage insurance, then it's worthwhile considering. And that's something to talk to your broker about. And it's something that is very step one in our 10-step process that we teach people about how to buy property, is to get your support crew in place. And if you have a really good broker on board who is prepared to advise you even before you think you're ready to buy and before you think you've got enough money, then you get that advice and you might find you can get into the market sooner. So that's the first suggestion. The second is your parents could go guarantor.
Depending on their situation.
Well, that's exactly right. And we're not saying you should do any of these things. We're saying you might want to investigate them. Yes. And it's not an option for everybody. And of course, if you're one of those people who are saying, well, that's all well and good, my parents don't even own a property, then that sucks. It totally sucks. And it's not an option for you. Also, often people look at the parents that they weren't able to have a property and they have gone into retirement by still renting. You know, that's a good motivator for some people to actually get into the property market, because you can see how tough it can be. And another one, which I'm starting to hear about more and more, I don't know if you've heard this one, Meighan, is grandparents prepaying inheritance. They're figuring that things are tough, and they're thinking, you know what, I'm going to help my grandkids out now while I'm still alive. So this is starting to be a thing.
Yeah, look, and if this is a case where grandparents can help in helping build a good deposit or fill in some gaps there's a lot to explore here on both sides. So again, we're just saying look at the options and explore the pros and cons and the risks and so forth. There are some tax implications So definitely get some really good accounting advice. There could be Centrelink implications. There could be pension implications, like lots and lots of things need to be taken into account there. It may be that this is all round a good decision. It may be that it is just actually the wrong thing to do. So just explore it. Talk to the people who know. Don't talk to your friends about these sorts of things.
Get advice
Talk to
from
the advisors. And if you do go down this path, you also need legal advice to make sure that all the agreements are in place. Is it a gift? Is it a loan? These sorts of things are really important. If your parents are a guarantor or they're giving you a gift or your grandparents are prepaying inheritance. So lots of things to think about.
Also, let's face it, not everybody has grandparents that can prepay inheritance or parents that can go guarantor. And that's where the federal government has been stepping in. And some state governments, Victoria has what's called a shared equity scheme. There's also the federal government's 5% deposit scheme. So if you can get a place with that, that obviously gets you in with a smaller deposit, but you also are borrowing a lot more money. So therefore your payments are going to be higher. But the shared equity schemes are where the government or there's actually there's a private equity
firm
shared equity scheme that has just been launched actually with Longview. We should get them on to talk about that. So there are more of those things that are coming out. And obviously each one needs to be investigated very thoroughly because you want to make sure what the conditions are and, where you might no longer be eligible for it and the repayments and what happens when you sell and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's quite a lot involved, but they are a great way of helping people get into the property market sooner, but also potentially into a bigger property, which might serve them longer. So there's lots of reasons why it's worth exploring. I'd be very careful, however, about some of these deposit schemes that are being offered to help you buy brand new. Some of them are being funded by developers. Yes, some of them are funded by developers just to help you buy their stock. So be very careful about that. But these are all options that you could start investigating that might help you get into the market sooner rather than have to save for longer for deposit because prices are rising.
Yeah. Now, the second challenge is the rising cost of living. And this is hitting everybody. This is not just a first home buyer challenge. It is certainly an Australia-wide challenge, but, we are seeing a lot of this happening across the globe as well. So what the report said was taking inflation into account, real incomes fell through the June quarter, meaning there was less left over for servicing housing costs after other necessary expenditures like energy bills and groceries were taken into account. This is tough stuff for everybody because you need to get from A to B in a lot of cases.
Yeah, this is really tough stuff. I mean, and, we all notice it when we go to the supermarket. Although lately I've actually noticed prices coming down of fresh fruit and vegetables. But that's, by the by.
That's positive.
That is a positive. And obviously, with less floods and things like that, then more food can get harvested and then sent to the supermarkets and the grocery stores. Anyway, beside all that, one of the things about this sort of macro data about all the real incomes, et cetera, and what that is basically that, even if incomes rise, if inflation rises more than incomes rise, then in reality, in terms of your spending power, your incomes have fallen. So that's where real incomes are as opposed to incomes, right? So it's all a bit complicated when you get into all this sort of stuff and everything has to be measured according to inflation. Interestingly enough, there are the different segments of the market out there that are more or less affected by these things. I mean, if your income is fixed and there's no chance of any progress with that, no chance of promotions, no chance of pay rises outside of CPI, then that is going to impact on you more than if you are at the beginning of your career and you're only at the beginning of your earning power. So it's one thing that first home buyers often have to think about, depending on where you are in your life stage, is that sometimes the horizon for you as an individual, forgetting the buying the home for a moment, sometimes the horizon for you in terms of your earnings is actually better and rosier than people at different stages of their lives. So I'm just wanting to sort of put it out there that a lot of these reports come out, they're big numbers, they're scary numbers, but they don't actually impact everybody equally. So I think that that's just something to keep an eye on, to think, actually, does that really impact me? in the same way it might impact somebody else. And before you're a homeowner, while you're in that saving phase, you might be actually better off than a lot of people, than a lot of other people. So I guess keeping that positive mindset and just remembering that it isn't all terrible, and sometimes some people are better off than others.
Yeah. And there are things that you can do to pull your belt in a little bit. I've certainly done it. I'm sure that you've done it, Veronica, whether it's just choosing a different cut of meat or a different type of meal plan for the week. There are times where I think, yep, I've got to really pull it in this week, because there are other expenses that I know that are coming up, whether that's the power bills coming in, the gas bills coming in, the insurance is due, whatever those things are. So it's looking across the board when you're looking to overcome this kind of challenge and saying, okay, where can I juggle this, and where is my little splurge pot so I can still have a little splurge every now and then. My kids love the Barefoot Investor book because it teaches you about how to kind of allocate your money so that you know that the bills are paid and you've got a little bit of money to spend over here if you need to. So having a good budgeting plan is really good to help overcome some of these cost of living pressures that we're seeing.
And I actually think that millennials and Gen Zs are a lot more entrepreneurial, if you want to call it that, or a lot more creative around this whole area than we Gen Xers. I actually think that,
so, yeah.
Yeah. So you guys could probably teach us something. And in fact, let's put it out there. If anyone has a really great ideas on living more efficiently and economically, and thinking in the context of the environment as well. I mean, you mentioned earlier about, choosing a cheaper cut of meat. I've actually chosen to eat a hell of a lot less meat. And actually, it's not so much cost of living, but clearly that does have a positive impact on that. But that's actually because of the impact on the environment of the way in which we create meat for human consumption. So that's another topic again. But if anyone's got a creative bent on this, or a particular area that this is your area of expertise, why not do an episode? I think that'd be quite cool. Anyway, this does lead into the third challenge, which is once you get the debt, right, rising costs of living and fall in real wages means, and also rising house prices means that there is a third challenge, which is servicing the debt.
Yeah, nationwide homeowners now have to spend, according to the report, 45.5% of their income to pay a mortgage on an average home. Now that's up from 42.7% in the March quarter. So people are paying more of their income to service their mortgage.
Now, and that is across every single capital city. But interestingly enough, in the report, and we'll put a link to one of the news articles about this, you can actually see there's a chart in there that the proportion of income needed to service a new mortgage. Now, as I mentioned before, that with all this macro data that's put out about Australia, there are lots of micro markets within Australia. And if you compare, and we're not saying go to Darwin, we are not, but in Darwin, because Darwin is a shocker of a property market, but in Darwin, for instance, that percentage of the income needed to service a new mortgage is 24.8%. That's the lowest. And then it goes right up to, in Sydney, shock of shocks, and probably no great surprise, 56.7%. And it does vary across the country. I mean, Canberra, which is also a very expensive city in terms of property prices, that's only 38.3%. So that just shows that they've got really high incomes.
High incomes in relation to the property prices.
Yeah. So, it's good to dig into this and really understand that it looks different wherever you live.
Yeah, and look, to overcome some of these challenges, or to face these challenges when you become a home owner, is to think about things like moving to a different location, maybe exploring a lower priced property that still meets your needs and is a good quality property. That's an option to consider, but you've got to make sure, of course, that it's going to meet your needs for the longer term, because you don't want to be moving from one property, you're trying to property hop, chasing your dream location in short time periods. That stepping stone strategy is a long-term strategy, not a short-term one.
Absolutely. We've had a number of students that were looking sort of in suburban areas and decided to move to regional areas, but they were careful to not move too far away from a major employment centre, and also looking at areas that have provided great schooling and lots of
Community feel
extracurricular
was important for some of those people, wasn't it?
and activities, sporting activities, et cetera, et cetera. So, that is an option, and there's something to consider as the big part of the bigger picture is moving to a cheaper location. Something to, I was reading a report on this recently about getting pay rises. Apparently men are much better at getting it than women. So, because they ask, apparently.
They're more inclined to ask the question. I think that's changing with time, but, it is something that even when I was younger, to discover there was disparity between what I was paid and someone doing the same job as me when I was in corporate was an absolute shock to me. And for a colleague to turn around and go, well, did you ask? It's like, I did not.
Well, we sort of think
it was quite an eye-opener.
If we do well, people should just offer it to us, shouldn't they?
Offer it to us. Yeah.
No one's watching us probably as careful as watching ourselves. So, sometimes, it might sound trite, might sound we're being very glib here. Go and get a pay rise. We're not trying to sound glib, but, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Is it time? Is it due? And is it justified?
Are
they're
you
the things
worth
that
it?
I was taught when you're looking at pay. Yeah. The other option is, Veronica, you mentioned it before, get a second job or a side hustle. Now, another way to generate income is a way to deal with this disparity between income and rising cost of ownership and mortgages. And that is an option. You and I don't just have one job. We have a number of sources and companies and ways of generating income. And I know that some of the people that work for me, they don't just have one source of income. They are interested, and I guess that's that entrepreneurial spirit that you mentioned earlier. There is an interest, not just an imperative, an interest in different ways of generating income.
Now, we're obviously not suggesting that you go and take two jobs and just forever have two jobs. What we're talking about here is getting yourself in a position where you can afford a mortgage. And we know from experience, we also know from working with our clients, that the pain when you first get a mortgage and you're getting used to all that does ease over time. And also, that rates will fall at some point. So sometimes you have to take some pain and you get some equity, you might have some options. So we're not saying if this is going to be your life forever, this is what you have to do. But sometimes it's a good idea to get yourself over a hump, is to take a second job for a while. And likewise, two incomes are better than one. So I know this sounds, you might howl me down for saying this, Meighan, I don't know, maybe our listeners will. But if you are thinking about having a child and you have the option just to put it off an extra year or 2 years so that you can see there's light at the end of the tunnel, you can see that there's a potential for buying a home. But if you have a child and one of you comes out of the working, the paid work for a period of time, and that is going to set back your dreams of owning a home maybe another 5 years, then just consider taking the short pain in terms of not having a child straight up, getting the home, then having the child. So I'm just saying, think about it in that order rather than doing it the other way around.
As opposed to a recommendation.
It's not a lifestyle imperative from me, no.
Yeah. And that, it is easier. It is a different process if you're looking to have a child and then going to get a mortgage afterwards than it is to have a mortgage and have a child. So just think that through when you're thinking about where are you in your life phases and where does that fit in. Because when a bank looks at you as a single income versus two incomes, if you are in a partnership, then your income together is more favourable than your income if there's only one of you working and earning an income. So just keep it in mind. So timing can be important. Also, refinancing. If you are in have a home loan, you can refinance, maybe extend the loan term. This is an option again, not financial advice, just something to think about. Explore the options, see what that can do to your repayments if things are a little bit tight. And then when things ease a little bit, that might be the time to really knuckle down and put some extra money back in to get back to where you were before. Again, it's an option. All these things worth doing before you get to a point of looking at your mortgage and saying, I don't know how we're going to pay that this month.
I know when I had my daughter some years back now, she's 17 now, I got, I'm fairly certain it was 6 months. So my bank actually put my repayments on hold for 6 months. So and that's another example about when you have the mortgage before you have the child, that there are more options. The other way around, I'm sure that they wouldn't
have given you the loan, perhaps.
Oh, exactly right. But once I had it, but also I had it for a few years, and I had built equity up in that property as well. So, once again, I'm sure they looked at the LVR and things like that. But, coming to, you're talking about the refinancing, extending the loan option. These are things that people can do down the track once their property's gone up in value. And these are options that, when you have a good property, might present themselves to you. And another one too, just to alleviate some short-term pain, might be to rent vest for a few years, live with the parents. Once again, easy to do before you have a child. Or maybe if you do have a child, they'll love you to move in and they'll be those extra babysitters. Who knows? But, sometimes we're just talking about a bit of a short-term pain here to make sure that your long-term gain, long-term you're better off. That's what we're talking about here.
Yep. Now, let's go into the fourth challenge, which is more listings don't necessarily mean cheaper prices.
I know.
All right. So just because, say, if it's part of a cyclical market and we're coming into spring, and traditionally spring selling season increases the number of properties that are available, that doesn't mean that prices are going to start to go down because there's more available. It doesn't necessarily mean that what you're looking for is going to be more readily available. And it certainly doesn't mean that what's available is of good enough quality to purchase.
That's one of the challenges that we as buyers agents face all the time. Often, we might be starting to move into a downward cycle in terms of the property prices, and I don't get excited about it anymore. I have to say, then, when I first started as a buyer's agent, I thought, excellent, we're going to have all these great buying opportunities, but actually the buying opportunities dried up, and there were less buying opportunities in a falling market because people don't have the confidence to list their properties, and they're going to get their price right. So when more listings come on the market, sometimes that's actually a result of rising prices, that people say, oh God, finally I'm going to actually get the price I want, so I will list my home. And so that's one of the sort of perverse things about a buyer's market versus a seller's market, that a buyer's market is actually still really hard to buy property. At a seller's market, prices might be rising, but in a way it's sort of easier in some ways for buyers because there's usually more stock around, but it's not often that prices fall and there's new listings, lots of listings to choose from, very rarely.
Yeah. Now, how you can manage this challenge,
don't try to fight the market.
It's a bit like what we said earlier, don't try and fight it. Don't try and anticipate that it will change in your direction and your favour. You have to actually really look at it and go, right, this is what I'm dealing with now. I have to get active and understand the rules of the game. I have to be prepared to engage with the players that are in the game right now, and I have to be prepared to move myself forward. Now, that absolutely doesn't mean rush, buy anything that comes up and pay anything that you have to. That's certainly not what we teach you in your first home buyer guide, but don't try and fight it. Don't be the one standing there waging a one-man war against the market saying, I'm going to wait until prices fall.
The sad thing is that people who wait till prices fall mostly miss out, because even we can sense it when a market bottoms out. But honestly, it never comes up in the data until about 3 to 6 months later. And then we can all say, there you go. We noticed that then. But at the time, it's impossible to tell. And what happens then, all of a sudden everybody piles in the market at the same time, and that's actually what makes prices start to rise again. So don't think you can ride the market. It's really important, just as we both said, don't fight it. Be ready to move when you're ready.
Yeah, and move quickly if you're ready.
Yes.
Yeah, don't sit on those hands and think, oh yeah, I really like that, but I'm sure something else is going to come up. If it's good, you're financially ready and it fits your life, part of your life that you're in, and that period forward that you're looking at for ownership of that property, don't fight it.
No,
just move.
And if you are one of these overanalyzers, which we do get quite a lot of overanalyzers come to us, and great, we are the home of overanalyzers because we will give you all the information you need in the right order, and then you can settle yourself down and go, yes, I have done all the right analysis and I have control. And that's really, really important, because if you're thinking, oh, Meighan and Veronica, they're just a bit positive here, just a bit positive, they just want us to buy anything at any price, that is absolutely not what we're about.
That's almost the opposite of what we encourage.
Right. The fifth challenge, which is going to make it sound like we're encouraging this, but we'll get to what we'll prove that we're not in a moment, is borrowing more, right? When prices rise, or if you're going to try to buy sooner with a lesser deposit, both of those point to the same thing, which is that you have to have a bigger mortgage. And that is really scary. And just to quote from that report again, as prices continue to rise, potential homeowners may feel like they're given no choice but to take out a loan they're not comfortable repaying in order to get the home of their dreams. Home buyers who are able to clear the deposit hurdle and serviceability assessment must now budget a bigger portion of their income to housing costs amid higher house prices. So how can we manage this?
That's really tough. We absolutely encourage people to buy the best asset that they can afford. Capital growth will allow you the option to refinance at a later date if you need to, as the value in your property goes up. But if you buy a lower quality asset and it isn't even moving at the rate that the general market is in the area that you've purchased in, then you may find that you haven't got the ability to refinance that property because there isn't any equity in it. Or when it comes time to step up to the next property, everything's moved so far above you because the asset that you purchased hasn't moved at the same rate as the rest of the market.
Yeah, and this does happen. You do not want to get trapped and stuck on that first rung of the property ladder. So that, with that in mind, you've got to have the long term in mind when you buy. And that means buying the best possible property you can buy now. And if you do have to borrow more money, you think, okay, well, if I can avoid upgrading sooner rather than later, then I'm going to save transaction costs and I'm going to be more settled for longer. And there's a real case to put forward for that and something to really consider. Whereas a lot of first home buyers, and I did this when I first bought, I bought something small that felt safe and I outgrew it in what felt like seconds. And that was not a good outcome.
And we actually have had some students that have done the course that have said the same thing. They bought something, they're not first-time buyers, they bought something, they realised that they bought the wrong thing because they were trying to keep their debt low. And really, in hindsight, what they told us and what you have said in previous episodes, Veronica, when you've shared your story, is you could have comfortably afforded a better quality asset, but it felt more comfortable to keep that price low. It was just that it put you in the wrong asset for what you needed that property to do for you in the long term.
Now, of course, if you are already stretched and working 2 jobs, we are not recommending that you borrow more than you can afford. That is not what we're talking about here.
No.
Because you really need to know you've got some wriggle room. If interest rates go up again, for example, you need the wriggle room. You don't want to be eating tuna every night. Baked beans and tuna, tins of tuna.
And certainly you can perhaps explore being a bit braver if you know your income is likely to improve in the short to medium term. And that may be a career trajectory that is reasonably mapped out in some sort of format or way. But certainly I wouldn't be, the bank's not going to look at what you might earn down the track. They're going to look at, your capacity to repay on your current income. Not what you might earn if you get that promotion at the end of the year. But of course, if there are bonuses or commissions involved, then some banks will look at that favourably, some will ignore it. Each bank has a different way of looking at how that income contributes to your ability to repay your borrowing capacity and your ability to repay.
Which is why you need a really good mortgage broker work with you on borrowing strategy and explain all of that. But it's also why, you've got every mortgage, every a first home buyer, when they first get a mortgage, always feels like this huge commitment and this ridiculous, 30-year mortgage, give me a break. And just the sheer responsibility of those repayments always feels absolutely daunting. And so what we're saying to you, sometimes you have to sort of take a big gulp and move through that. And really, if you can look forward to your own earning capacity and know that you're on a good wicket, you're actually on a good career path, and you like your job as well. Let's face it, if you hate your job, then don't do this. Then take a little bit of be a bit braver and push yourself harder if you're in that sort of situation. Always with the guidance of a good mortgage broker, though.
Yeah. And keep in mind that interest rates will fall again, and at some point they will rise again. So that roller coaster is going to come and go of interest rate rise and falls.
Absolutely. And you've probably heard me say before that when I bought my first property and I locked in half of my mortgage at a rate of 9.85%, I thought I was absolutely so clever because I'd had friends that had interest rates in the double digits. So it's all relative, right? And, at the moment, I hate the fact I'm sitting at 5 point whatever it is. I hate it, absolutely hate it. But, all that time back then, clearly, yes, granted, smaller mortgage, but it is all relative. We do get used to it. We do accommodate it, and the market continues to go on. So, and that's the worst thing. If you just opt out and decide you're going to, wage your one-person war against the property market, you may wage your one-person war against rising prices, rising interest rates, all that stuff, the market doesn't care about you. You will get left behind, and we don't want you to get left behind. We want you to get a nice, secure home and a good first home that's going to give you all these options down the track.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Veronica, this report was really interesting. We always encourage people to read these things and not just take the fear factor out of it, but to actually look at, are there opportunities here? And do I have to step back and go, no, I can't do this. It's too hard. There are too many risks. Or are there things that you can look at with these risks and challenges and say, okay, I see that is a challenge. I have some options that I can explore here. And so what we wanted to do out of today was to get you to step back when you read some of these reports and some of this media coverage and go, all right, I see that there's some challenges here, but there are things that I can do to overcome it. I need to explore them more deeply.
And keep the course. Quick note, if you've been thinking about doing your first home buyer guide, which is the 10-step course that Meighan and I have put together to help you buy your first home without making really avoidable mistakes, the course only costs $990, okay? And you get direct access to us to help guide you through the negotiations. Trust me, you will give the sales agent a hell of a lot more than $1,000 if you do not know what you're doing. So I just want to put that in context for you. If you're thinking about doing the course, it is worth it, not just because we say it's worth it, but because we know that our students have been saving well in excess of that in their negotiations.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.